I'm Sheela Clary, and welcome to our second story night here at the Center for Peace Through Culture, also known as Deb Kaufman's beloved gallery. And we are really honored this evening to again be in the presence of Deb Kaufman's mom, Sarah Kaufman, right here. So she is our honored guest tonight, and I think you all appreciate with me just the special vibe of this place that was really like infused with her generous, loving, accepting spirit. I know I feel it every time I come in here. So thank you everybody for being here tonight. We are going to have a total of, I believe, 9 stories tonight. Yes, building momentum. Last time it was only 6. So we're going to have an intermission. So a little socializing. There's wine out there in case you didn't catch it. So after 4 or 5 stories, we'll see how we go, what the vibe is. We will have a little intermezzo, and then we'll come back for the remainder of our stories. Sound good?
Yeah.
If anybody out here is like a would-be storyteller, but like hasn't gotten up the nerve yet, or is like, come here tonight to kind of like test the waters and see how if you feel like you could actually do it. I know, Hannah, you definitely, you could totally do, you could do it in your sleep. If anybody feels like they'd want to be a future storyteller, then just reach out to me. I'll give you my contact information at the end of the evening. Okay, all right. Without further ado, I'm going to call out, he's very nervous, so you have to give him a really, really, really big round of applause. First time he's ever done anything like this. Andreas Engel.
When I was a young kid, I could not get a word in edgewise around my family dinner table. I just, all of the philosophizing, the analytical talk, the scientific stuff, I just could not get past that kind of brain power. My parents are linguists, cultural anthropologists, and translators. And when I was a young kid, the bulk of their work was actually in a very remote part of Guatemala, where we were immersed in a Mayan language community called the Pocomchi. My 3 older brothers, they, like, right out of the gate, it seemed that they were linguists themselves and experts as much as my parents, and had their own individual, annoying genius on top of that. And so I just couldn't compete with that. I was different from all of them, and I was quiet. I had a limited vocabulary, and I was interested in bugs. So my next older brother, 2 years older than me, at an impossibly young age, he taught himself how to read. In fact, he taught me how to read. And he was soon studying 2, 3, 4, and 5 letter dictionaries so he could get better at his Scrabble game. And let me tell you, in my family, in my linguist family, playing Scrabble was a high form of torture, the worst. So one day I was playing Scrabble with my brother, and he laid down the pieces. CRWTH. CRWTH. And I looked at that. CRWTH? That is not a word. It doesn't even have a vowel. And he said, look it up. Look in the dictionary. It's a Celtic word. It's a Celtic instrument, and the W serves as a vowel. This is what it was like in my family. And of course, absolutely true. And so realizing that my Scrabble game now was completely futile, I escaped down the road and went to play with my friend Aurelino, who couldn't speak a word of English. He could only speak in his native tongue, Pocomchi. And this was like an oasis. I mean, it was like no longer did I have to deal with these weird Celtic words with funky vowels. So, and we, Abelino couldn't speak my language, and I couldn't speak his language. And both of our languages were infinitely complex. But it didn't matter because we couldn't talk to each other. We'd say we were equals. We were equals, and we played together and had a great time. So many, 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 many years have passed since those days. And my family is now spread across 4 time zones in the United States and Canada. And we rarely get together, my family, at the same time. When we do, it's the same. It's like that competition for, and so this last New Year's Eve, when one of my brothers decided, he contacted all of us and said, "How about we do like a family, like one long epic Zoom call where we ring in the New Year's over each of our 4 time zones?" And I thought to myself, I can't think of a more insane idea. But I guess because none of us have a social life, that's exactly what we did. And all of you now probably realize, or know by now, like Zoom, the first half of every Zoom call is trying to resolve technical issues, right? And with older parents, it's even doubly so. So the Zoom call started, and a couple of my brothers got it going, and sure enough, the intellectual stuff started right up, firing up, talking about brewing and like whatever. And then my parents, even though that they were in the same location, they decided to join with 2 different computers. And the feedback from their computers just started to pound and echo, and it got bigger and bigger and bigger until my brother had to mute them. And then things subsequently like cascaded into this hilarious like devolving of communication. And there were people talking, people couldn't hear, some could hear, some couldn't. It resorted to body language and my dad scribbling things on a piece of paper, putting it up on the screen. And I'm looking on the Zoom screen, and I'm seeing like in the background, in one of my brother's like quadrants on the screen, I see a TV in the background, and I see there's people celebrating. The ball has dropped at Times Square, and people are celebrating. We missed our moment. And so I sat back and I looked at all of this and I thought, my brilliant genius linguist family has gotten to this point at this particular moment where they couldn't talk, they couldn't hear, they couldn't talk, they couldn't be understood, and finally we were equals. Thank you, and to my good brother in the Pokenchi community I grew up with, in Jioshawe.
That was awesome, Andreas. Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you. Thank you. I think we should see him up here again, don't you think? Agreed. His little story. Oh, by the way, I have little scraps of paper, which maybe after the next storyteller, if anybody's inclined to just tell like 1 or 2 sentence little brief story under the theme of tonight, which is Lost in Translation. We all have our own lost in translation stories, whether foreign language, not misunderstood in English, body language, any kind of language, interpret it any way you want. If you're inspired to tell a brief little story, I will just, raise your hand after the next storyteller. I'll come around, you can write down your story, and I'll read a few of those in between. Okay, all right. But meanwhile, our next storyteller is a Center for Peace to Culture regular. And so please welcome to the stage, Ted Phelps.
In 1987, I bought my first house and moved in with my wife. This was in Albany, New York. We had met the year before in New York City, practicing Tai Chi, which included sparring with a partner and sword play. So her father had carved for us a wooden practice sword in mahogany. It was awesome. I mean, these aren't made to cut, right? But awesome. And so I perched mine like a sentinel above our entrance door, just in case. 3 years pass, we have a baby, we put our house on the market. The real estate company called itself Manor Homes. And they really took their name to heart when they made their signs. They were awesome. They were heavy, beautiful, white 4x4 post and cross beam, and the sheet metal sign was thick metal. And the reason I'm telling you this is that one night somebody murdered it. I still can't figure out how or why. I mean, what are we doing there? They the post was cracked and bent over right onto the sidewalk. The sign itself was dented and scratched up and bent. It was dead, useless. And it seemed random. We didn't have feuds with our neighbors or anything like that. But it was pretty worrisome because it was so darn close to the house, like 5 paces from the front door. Agency replaced it, a big deal. But a few nights later, around midnight, probably a Saturday, and this is August, so it's hot. No air conditioning, windows are down. You're in your summer sleepwear, which for me was judo pants. And so you're drifting off to sleep. And then from outside, bang! You open your eyes, bang, bang! You sit up, sounds like gunshots. And then bam, 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 and you jump out of bed. Somebody's wrecking your sign again. Men. There's much to be said about men these days. But for 40 or 50 millennia, when a man has a woman and a baby inside the house and its for sale sign is being beat up, they don't take it lying down. They're just not made to. So I get up, I keep the lights off, still in bare feet and judo pants. I'm just going to investigate. I go around to the front windows. And there through the forsythia, I see them, 20 feet from the house, a cluster of heavy dudes like a football huddle, having it out with my sign. Now, be clear, I did not pause, and I did not think. I didn't wonder if our asking price was offending them. What happened is, I had dropped over me a bubble from the gods of man. Like going into a dream, I had no say in the matter. The bubble dropped over me, and when it did, that for sale sign was my land. It was my house. It was my wife and baby. It was my skin and bone. And yes, in that bubble, I had a sword. A mahogany sword. I slid over to the door, took down the sword. Quiet as a ninja, I turned the brass knob, stepped out onto the walkway leading to the street. I held the sword high with 2 fists at the hilt, like that, and waited till someone saw me. And then I charged. In my mind, I had already struck them, but if I had had to make a bruising contact with any one of them, I would have failed. They took off at the speed of fright. They went on down to the end of the block and stood there looking at me. 5, 10, 15 seconds. We stood half a football field apart, looking at each other. I held 4. And then they turned the corner and went into the all-night store. And my bubble popped. And I felt pretty naked and bare feet and judo pants under the street lights of the city with a sword, So I go back in to tell the story to my wife. But it's not over yet. Now, through the windows, there's a sound like this. See if you can tell what it is. Yeah, all right. And the walls are flashing red, blue, red, blue, red, blue. So I put on jeans, put on shoes, dark shirt, and went out there. And there were 2 police cars crowding the street. And an officer comes up to me and asks me if I live nearby. Yes, officer, this is my house. Well, your neighbor up there, and he points to a window in the next building, which would have given a filmmaker a perfect view of the scene I had just played a role in. Your neighbor up there says tonight she heard gunshots about 10 minutes ago. And when she looked out her window, she saw standing right about where we are, a man all in white, holding a rifle and pointing down to the end of the gun. Did you hear gunshots or see anybody with a gun? Can't say that I did. Lost in translation. Can't say that I did. Why? Were you asleep? A lot going on, but yeah, trying to, with my wife and baby. Okay, well, I hope we all have a quiet night from here on. And I said, well, officer, just a second. Look at this. I want to show you something. See this for sale sign? It's the second time this week. Somebody's been trying to kill it. And he gave it a quick look. But maybe, as a cop, he could drop that bubble from the ancient gods of men over it, because we never again had to contend with for sale sign police all these years.
All right. Has anyone got no?
I was listening to every drop of that.
Oh, okay. All right, good. Okay. Well, I'll collect them at our halftime. All right. How about that? All right. Well, let's launch right into our next storyteller. Our next storyteller is going to be a familiar face to those who came last time and who have perhaps joined me on another storytelling adventure. Where is she? Eileen Marcus. There you are. Eileen Marcus.
I'm not pregnant. But when I was a little girl, my favorite book was Amelia Bedelia. Anybody know Amelia Bedelia? Amelia Bedelia was a housekeeper for a very wealthy family. And every morning, the people she worked for would give her a list of things she had to do. And before Amelia Bedelia did anything, she would put a cake in the oven, leave it to set, bake the cake, and go off and do her things. And every day, Amelia Bedelia had an adventure. Nothing went right. As a matter of fact, everything went wrong. So when they told Amelia Bedelia to dress the turkey, get it ready to put in the oven, she would sew a little top hat and a little, vest and get it ready. When they told Amelia Bedelia to draw the hedges, she wouldn't draw the hedges, she would draw the curtains. She would draw a picture in charcoal, like Andreas, the curtains, and put it next to the curtains, but she would never close them. And I just loved Amelia Bedelia because at the end of the day, even though everything went wrong, it went right because of her cakes were so delicious. And when I got married, my marriage reminded me of Amelia Bedelia. Not because we were wealthy, and not because we had a housekeeper, but because there were a lot of things lost in translation. I wanted to save money, and my husband wanted to spend money. But we agreed we were going to save money. His idea of saving money was spending $200 on a couch instead of $400. He said, look, we're saving. I'm like, no, that's spending. We don't need a couch. You get how it went on and on. And any Star Trek fans here? No? I love to make Andreas jokes in the end of my stories. Unlike Andreas's family, my ex, that is not a secret, and it's not the punchline of the story. My ex-husband, really, we used to play Scrabble, and when he had a word with all vowels, he would say, "It's Klingon," because he did not like Star Trek, and I did, so it was a dig. So we had a real communication problem, but the biggest fight we had was over a song called "Give Me the Beat Boys" by Dobie Gray. Give me the Beat Boys to rock my soul. I want to get lost in your rock and roll and drift away. He insisted it was "Give Me the Beach Boys." And I went with it. We were fighting about the couch, the Klingon. I just went with it. Okay. Finally, in mid-90s, the internet comes out. And what do you know? You don't have to research these things in black and white. You can see, "Give me the BEAT, Beat Boys." He refused to believe those were the words. Divorce ensued. We then, not the punchline, but it happened. Okay. We get divorced, and that was heartbreaking. Even though I was the one that didn't want to play Klingon Scrabble anymore, even though I love Star Trek, it was really hard on my daughter. She had to go to his house on the weekend. She had to leave her home, her friends, and go to his house. And she would say, "Ma, all we do is sit inside, watch TV, and eat pizza," which was ironic because that's all he did when we were married. And I had a kid that didn't like pizza, which is also unheard of. So I, as her mother, would pack little packages and make little games and hide them, in her coats and in her pocket or in her backpack, and made sure she had enough to eat. And she would come home from the weekend and say, "Ma, you're a super mom. You are the only thing, that made me get through this weekend. Thank you, Mom." And, to much my surprise, that really filled my soul because I was worried about her and the divorce and being separate. Well, eventually, my ex met a woman and they got engaged. I had a new worry. Was I going to lose my supermom status? There's this woman. She drives a good car. She has kids. They're busy. They're going here after all these weekends of boring stuff. There's something going on. And let me tell you, it became quite quickly apparent that was not happening. I was not going to lose my super status to her. So I relaxed a little. And then Aunt Sarah came on the scene. Aunt Sarah was my daughter's stepmother's sister. And all of a sudden, it was Aunt Sarah, Aunt Sarah, Aunt Sarah. Aunt Sarah has the longest black, beautiful hair. Aunt Sarah, has these great sneakers. They're great. Aunt Sarah built a tent that had lights and tea lights, and we went in the tent, and there were pillows. It was fabulous. And I'm like, shrinking it over here. Well, what does Aunt Sarah do? Oh, she's at Calhoun. That's a swanky private school on the Upper West Side of New York. So Aunt Sarah's at Calhoun. What does she do at Calhoun? She's an artist, Ma. She's an artist. You should see what she has, crayons and Crayolas and paints and stuff. And she teaches us things, and it's just so wonderful. And then came the time when, how'd you get home from the station, honey? Oh, Aunt Sarah got us a limousine. We came home in a limousine. I was not competing with Aunt Sarah. I was losing my status, but I decided to lean into it. So her birthday was coming up, my daughter's, and I invited Aunt Sarah to the slumber party. I figured at the very least I'll get some help, maybe even some tea lights, you never know. Something will happen at the slumber party. And we're preparing for the party, and the day comes, and the buzzer rings, and I open the door, and there's Aunt Sarah. Her black hair, just as my daughter described, but the braces in her mouth, huge mouthful of braces. Her sleeping bag, she's holding her teddy bear. Her sneakers, adorable if you like light up sketches that are sparkly. And standing next to her is her mother. Aunt Sarah is 1 year older than my daughter. And it became very clear at that moment that I was not going to lose my status as supermom. And also, I was not going to get any help at the slumber party.
Just pretend I'm not here.
Any other mini stories to collect or to write? Cool. Anyone? Yes. There you go. Any others? Yeah. Anyone else? Little mini story. No. Yes. Not yet. Not yet. It's coming. It's brewing. Okay. All right. Oh, I'm going to tell a story. Got a little mini story. All right. Let's see if I can read this. Okay. Awesome. Thank you, Eileen. That was awesome. Love that. Aunt Sarah. When I went to Peru with my sister, I kept calling her my ice cream instead of sister because my Spanish was so bad. How do you say ice cream in Spanish? Helada. Helados. And how do you say sister? Hermana. Hermana e helados. Oh, exactly the same. Exactly. I can totally see it. I have a story along those veins, along that same line. So as you'll hear my story later, but I studied in Milan, and when I had my best friend there was Joel, and he was very, very earnest. His Italian was not great, but he was very earnest. And he lived right next to an elderly Italian woman who thought he was charming as hell because he knew all about opera, and she invited him over for a fancy dinner party with all of her elderly friends. So Joel was there. He's 19, and he's the only young man in this room of elderly women. And he was trying to make conversation. He's just learning Italian. So he says to them, "Ho sentito che gli italiani hanno un grande passione per cazzo," which means, "I've heard that the Italians have a great passion for penises." Which is true. But he had meant to say calcio. Calcio is soccer. So he had meant to say calcio, and so it's a calcio cazzo. Allora, okay, our next, oh, the Italian, I'm speaking too much time. Our next storyteller this evening is a second timer. Is that correct? Yes. See, he's like totally chill this time. Last time he was so nervous. He insisted on being first because he was like, I just have to get this over with. And now he's just like an old pro. Okay, see, totally confident. All right, so please welcome to the stage Devin Arnold.
Hello. So in 2015, I was working as a landscaper. I had recently started my own company, and I was going to take an exciting journey to Canada. It was going to be my first time traveling internationally by myself. I was going to visit an old friend of mine from high school. I was really excited about it. And so I was traveling in my little Ford Focus car, and I go and I get to the border. And going to Canada, I had assumed that if there was going to be any sort of difficulties at the border, it was going to be at the other end, going from Canada back into the United States. I assumed that the Canadians were, pretty open to just letting anybody in. And, I didn't really think to take any special precautions. I didn't really change the way that I dressed or anything. So I get to the border and I'm at the little check-in station, and I'm wearing just my normal work clothes. So I have dirty cargo pants and a sweatshirt because it was raining at the last town I was in. And so I get to the little counter, and the Border Patrol guy is, welcome to Canada. Why are you here? I tell him I'm visiting a friend. And he looks me up and down and he goes, "Oh, wearing your sweatshirt, I see. So, it's a nice day here in Canada. What's with the sweatshirt?" And so apparently this is red flag number one. And so, I tell him, well, it was raining in the last town I was in. It was, Watertown, New York, or New York. It was kind of gross out. I hadn't taken my sweatshirt off. I apologize. And so he goes, "Okay, well, I think we're gonna have to look in your pockets. Why don't you take everything out of your pockets and, let's see what you have." So I comply and I take the things out of my pockets, and it's, my phone, and I have a pocket knife and another pocket knife and a third pocket knife. I have my little work notebook that has all my client names and hours worked and amounts of money owed, and red flag number 2 and 3. So, they go, "Oh, why you got so many pocket knives there?" And, I tried to explain, well, I work as a landscaper and different knives are for different functions. One's for, cutting heavy things. One was a multi-tool. One was a, like very dull digging knife. And they go, what's with this notebook? What are all these names? What's, these dollar amounts next to it? Very suspicious, apparently. And, I tried to explain I'm just a landscaper. Those are my clients. And so, apparently they're not really buying that. So they say, okay, I think we're going to need to inspect your car now. Why don't you have a seat over here on this wooden bench and we'll take your car and, just check things out. And so, they've taken all of my possessions and they set me in this little wooden bench outside. And I can see this big kind of like hangar structure. And I see my car go into there and I'm just kind of waiting on the bench and sitting and waiting and twiddling my thumbs. And at this point, the panic is starting to set in a little bit. Uh, I had not intentionally, as far as I knew, brought anything I shouldn't have into Canada. Um, but I was driving a car that I had been driving since I was a high schooler. And there had been some youthful shenanigans in that car. And, although I didn't knowingly have anything with me, I'm thinking at this point, oh my God, what did I drop in the car? What could be in there? What's going to happen next? Am I going to go to jail in Canada forever? And so I'm sitting and waiting and twiddling my thumbs. And eventually I see them with a dog and they lead the dog into the hangar where my car is. And at this point, I'm getting incredibly nervous and I'm thinking about all those episodes of Locked Up Abroad I had watched as a youngster, and I'm just trying to figure out what's gonna happen next. And I'm waiting, and nothing's really happening. And eventually, the guard comes out, and he comes up to me and says, "Okay, we're gonna bring you in, and I hope you don't have a problem with dogs because we're going to need the dog to smell you." And I say, "Okay, yeah, totally fine. I love dogs. Dogs are wonderful." And so they lead me into this little, hangar building, and my car is in there, and they've taken everything out of my car and stacked it in these nice little neat piles on the outside. And the dog is in there, and they're leading the dog through the car around the piles of stuff. They bring the dog over to me. They have the dog smell me repeatedly. They have the dog go through the piles again, through the car again. They have the dog smell me again. As far as I can tell, the dog isn't, indicating everything or indicating anything. And eventually, they say, okay, it looks like everything is all right. Why don't you just go back to the bench and we'll get situated here and we'll, let you know when you can go back on your way. And so I have a moment of relief. I think, okay, I made it. I'm not going to go to Canadian jail. Awesome. And so I'm waiting on the bench. I'm excited. I'm waiting on the bench. I'm still waiting on the bench. And more time is going by, and my relief starts to get less and less, and the nervousness and the anxiety starts to build up a little bit more. And I'm still waiting, and I'm still waiting, and I start to think, well, I probably shouldn't still be waiting this long. If everything was fine, they probably would have said something. And then I see them with a different dog. And they bring the second dog into the hangar. And I feel that can't be a good thing. Second dog usually isn't a good thing in this situation. So I'm still waiting, and no one's communicating anything to me. No one's saying anything. And I'm just sitting there on the bench, twiddling my thumbs, waiting for something to happen. And eventually the guard comes out and he goes, okay, we're all set. We wanna ask you a couple of quick things before we let you go. And so they lead me back into the hangar and they're starting to put the stuff back in the car. And the guard at this point seems like kind of noticeably like uncomfortable. Kind of seems like he's trying to say something but having a hard time with it. So he's looking at me and he's trying to ask this question. He goes, man, I gotta ask, okay, so here's the thing. We went through your camera, we saw the pictures, we gotta know what happened to the girl. what happened to the girl? Is she okay? You got to tell us what happened. And so I have no idea what the hell this guy is talking about. I'm trying to think, oh my God, what sort of pictures do I have on my camera that is leading this guy to be so uncomfortable? And then it hits me and I go, oh my God, no, unrelated. They're unrelated pictures. That girl is good. She is wonderful. I can call her up right now. So apparently there was a somewhat horrific and macabre misunderstanding where there was two completely unrelated sequences of photographs that, when viewed together, tell a somewhat grisly tale. Um, so I had a friend and coworker, a fellow landscaper, who had a high sensitivity to poison ivy. And working as a gardener, she would encounter poison ivy pretty readily. And because she was so sensitive to it, sometimes she would get really terrible rashes. So one point she got this really nasty, awful, bubbling rash all over her arm. And I took some pictures of it because I thought it was kind of cool looking. So the first series of pictures are you see her kind of looking at the camera, holding her arm, and then you see kind of a close up of the arm, and it's this gross, mass. And I guess it's kind of framed in a way that you can't really tell the arm is still attached in the second photo. So then the other sequence of photographs, the unrelated ones, was a oyster mushroom grow kit that I got. And so I was taking pictures of the development of these beautiful oyster mushrooms. But the growing medium that they came in was kind of this weird bluish, pinkish, kind of corpsey looking material. And it happened to be at pretty much the same angle that you see the arm at in the last picture. Uh, So yeah, apparently the Canadians decided, I wasn't a drug smuggler, but I may be harboring people parts. Uh, the second dog was a corpse finding dog, it turns out. But yeah, after all that, they apologized and let me go on my way, and I enjoyed a wonderful vacation in Ontario.
Wow. Well, I just did not know where that was going at all. At all. Wow. Corpse finding dog. Wow, that's intense. Holy moly. Wow. All right. Okay, I think we're going to have a little intermission now. So everyone just feel free to get up and grab some more wine or water or seltzer in the bathroom upstairs. And if you do want to tell a mini story, and everyone wants to take their seat as we get ready. All right, I've got a few mini stories here. Unfortunately, these papers were just too short for these stories, so some of them got truncated here. All right. All right. I lived in Mexico during my junior year of college, and my host mother was an amazing cook. One day, when we sat down to an amazing fragrant meal, I wanted to show my appreciation for the soup and said, "Como me encantan las lentejuelas." And my mother dissolved into a good bit of giggling, and afterward explained that I had expressed such kind appreciation for a bowlful of sequins. So every time I eat lentil soup, I think of this, the difference between lentejuela and lenteja. Very sweet. All right. When I was in high school, I went to the Soviet Union to sing with my high school chorus. We sang with students all over. 1 year after we were there, a group from Minsk came to Newtown, and we each had 2 students staying in our homes. I was not supposed to drive my 2 girls, but I did. I took them to Kent Waterfalls, and they did not speak English, I did not speak Russian, but we had an amazing time, communicating so well until one of them was found splashing in the water in a white t-shirt with a huge audience. There was more to that story, but there's not enough fruit. I guess we'll have to hear the rest in an actual story. To be continued. Yeah, to be continued, exactly. All right. All right. Our next storyteller of the evening is a newbie here, and I think to storytelling in general, I believe. So please give it up a warm, warm welcome for Heather Campbell.
I am a part of a very large extended family. I'm one of 23 first cousins, and growing up in Milwaukee, Wisconsin, we all lived in about 20-minute drive from each other. So holidays were big. We were all together, and nothing was better than Thanksgiving. So Thanksgiving started on Wednesday night with Auntie Susie's for pie night. So you would bake the desserts and eat pizza. Thursday was obviously football, go Packers, and then dinner, whatever. And then Friday was fish fry and bowling. I love, love, love Thanksgiving. And I have fully indoctrinated my husband and my two daughters to also love Thanksgiving. Obviously, with COVID, Thanksgiving has stunk. So this year, when Thanksgiving was back on, I was so excited. Going to be Auntie Susie's, Thursday dinner, Friday something fun, all great. We decide to take the girls out of school early so that we can be there for the whole thing, and we're going to just fly at Thanksgiving. What can go wrong? So actually, we get to the airport, it's flawless. We fly there, we get great parking, incredible. If anybody needs parking in Boston, I can help you. And we're sitting at the lounge and relaxing, and I'm just checking email, and I see an email from a doctor. I had requested an appointment for my daughter. She was having some problem with her eyes, and I was asking for an appointment for the next week. So I open up the email, and it says, Shelby cannot get on a plane. And at this point, it becomes a slow motion movie in my head. There's a narrator. Her name is Blanche. She is a 3-pack-a-day smoker. She has had a hard life. Blanche looks at this email and says, ignore it. I can't ignore this email. So I grab Steve and we call the doctor. And the doctor says she can't get on the plane. With her retina and cabin pressure, it could be terrible and blah, 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 and you've got to go to an ER and get it checked out. Blanche says, argue with him. I can't argue with this doctor. This is my daughter. So Steve and I get Shelby and we bring her out and I say, okay, so little change in plan. Everything's going to be okay. You and Dad are just going to quickly go to the ER. You're going to get checked out because you know that eye thing that's going on. The doctor is just a little worried about it. We need to make sure everything's okay. And then you and Dad are going to come back here and you're going to get on a plane and Tatum and I are going to go now. And small change, and I'm really sorry, but it's going to be okay. Blanche is screaming in my head. Are you high? It's going to be okay. Oh, you're just going to go to the ER because they're neurologists just sitting around on the Wednesday before Thanksgiving to check out your daughter. Oh, sure. And then once that happens, which it's never going to happen, you're just going to go back to the airport because you can always get on a flight so easily the day before Thanksgiving. Airlines are going to love that. Luckily, Shelby cannot hear Blanche. Only I can. We run to the gate, now completely empty, as they are Heather Campbell, Shelby Burnham, Steve Burnham. Like, hi, we're here. Blanche says, oh my God, look at her. She's glaring at you. She hates you. This is never gonna work. And I totally agree with Blanche. And I get up and I say, I'm so sorry. We've had a medical emergency. 2 of us are gonna get on the plane and 2 of us aren't. And the guy at the desk looks at me. And Blanche says, he's gonna blow. And he reaches over the desk and he starts rubbing my arm. And he says, I'm really sorry. And Blanche says, whoa. Human kindness? I did not see that coming. I think I didn't either. And he continues, okay, so who's getting on the plane and who's staying? and my lips kind of trembling. And I look and I say, this daughter and I are going to get on the plane, and my husband and this daughter are going to stay. And he's still rubbing my hand. Okay, Mom, you've got a good plan. I need you, though, to get on that plane right now. And I'm going to take care of Dad and your other daughter. But you and your other, you have to get on that plane right now. And I think the first agent kind of hugged me all the way onto the plane. And I sit down and they close the door, and Blanche is now screaming, "You are a terrible person. You are the worst mother ever. This is never going to work. Thanksgiving is ruined. I tell Blanche to shut up. And I turn to my other daughter and I say, so I think everything is actually going to be really okay. This is all going to work. But this has been a lot to handle right now, and I need to cry. And she grabs my hand and says, okay. And I start sobbing. I'm just sobbing, letting it all out. And the flight attendant is at my feet within seconds. What can I do? What do you need? What can I do? And Blanche says, first class. And I kind of agree with Blanche. But I say tissues. Tissues would be really great. And then she helps me get on so that I can text with Steve and Shelby. And I text the whole flight. And by the time we have landed, Shelby has been cleared to fly. Now Steve's narrator kicks in. And I don't know if Steve's narrator has a name. I don't know if it smokes, whatever. But he basically is not believing this is going to work because he's been given a piece of paper by the first agent and just told, just come back and you'll get on the plane. There's no way he thinks this is going to happen. So I'm still at the airport. I'm at the baggage claim. And I find another person behind a desk who's typing away. And I say, excuse me, I'm so sorry for interrupting. There was a medical emergency and half of my party got on the plane and half of it didn't. And I just need to check to make sure that this actually is going to work. And he looks up at me and I think, okay, Blanche, go ahead. He's going to yell at me. And he says, I'm so sorry. Is everything okay? Again, kindness. And I'm totally taken back. And I say, actually, medically, yes, but I'm not sure they're going to get on a plane and be here. And he takes the information and he looks. Yep, they're full. They're totally fine. They're going to be on, they've got seats. They're going to be great. Just have them show up. Wow. I'm like, okay. So hours later, we are back at the airport. I've brought cousins, I brought an uncle. We were all there. It's like that scene in Love Actually when they're all at the airport. I am so thankful that I did not listen to Blanche's interpretation. And I'm so thankful for the kindness that we received the entire time. And as I can tell, you are all an amazingly kind audience. I will answer the two questions that are now in your kind heads. Number one, my daughter's fine. She's got something going on. She needs to strengthen her eyes. She's got to do this weird thing. She seems to be great. Number two, Delta.
Oh my God, that was awesome. Thank you, Heather. Let's give another round for Heather. You know, it was funny. I was just having to make a flight to go to a wedding, and I was like, Delta. I definitely have it because I had gone over this story with Heather. I was like, I definitely know Delta. I want to go with Delta. Yeah, you're an ambassador. All right. So, any other little stories for me to collect? No.
Well, you can collect mine, but I think it might get lost in translation.
Oh, well then good. Then it would be like in keeping with the theme.
That's actually, I don't know if you'd be able to read it. Everybody said that's the far.
I'll read all of them. All right, let's see. All right. Well, not so much for anonymity. It's all right. All right. At the end of the bar stood a gorgeous man, and we made eye contact, and he struggled his way through the crowd. Oh, very romantic. Keeping eye contact and smiling, my heart was pounding with anticipation. As he walked closer, he smiled flirtatiously and said, "Aren't you Miranda's mom? I went to school with her."
That is a really well told little story.
So, my entire life, everybody has said to me that I am very dry. I have a very dry sense of humor. And if I'm being really honest, I have no idea what that means at all. None. But I do know about myself that I tend to be very blunt and direct speaking. It is a effect of or a symptom of being on the spectrum. So my little sister has 3 autistic children, and I have most of my life worked with, I have a degree in early childhood education. I put myself through college working with autistic children. So when my little sister had her first son, and I said, hey, he needs some extra services, she didn't speak to me for 3 months because people don't like to hear that kind of thing about their firstborn perfect child. But by the time she had the third one, she called me one day. My niece, my only niece, was born, and she also had autism symptoms. And she called me. Izzy was about 3 at the time, and she said, listen, you're going to be Isabel's role model. She's gonna look up to you. So you really need to go to the doctor and get a formal autism diagnosis. And I wasn't very nice to her about that. Because when I had suggested that her son might have some autistic traits, she didn't talk to me for 3 months. So I said, Tina, what do you think I'm autistic? Why do you think I'm autistic? And she proceeds to go into this whole thing and explains to me that women are underdiagnosed with autism because our symptoms present very differently than men. They're the same, but they present very differently because of the way that the differentiation between raising men, girls and boys, basically. And I know all of this, but I made her go on for 45 minutes because I wanted her to be a little uncomfortable, because what she didn't know is that I had been diagnosed as having Asperger's when I was 3 years old. Our parents just didn't really care so much, but it turns out that Isabel is entirely my mini me. And as an adult, I have grown to have a little bit of filter. Not much, but a little bit of a filter, where Isabel will just say whatever she wants to say. So, like, I have in earnest asked somebody, did you think about that before you said it out loud? And then was like surprised when they were offended by that. Isabel went to school, and one of her classmates got in trouble, and she said to her, you know, if you don't want them to treat you like you're stupid, maybe you shouldn't act like you're stupid. Again, in earnest, she wasn't being mean. She's just very blunt. And so that's the way I am too. And like, she calls me every day. We talk. I love having a little person that is just exactly like me. She really just is exactly like me, and it's fun. And I've never had a problem with it. And it's always been kind of a like, oh, finally somebody who gets me. And I thought that was great. And every summer she comes, well, prior to COVID, Every summer she comes and spends the summer with me. So when she was 9, she came and we did all of the Berkshire things. I took her to Jacob's Pillow and she loved it. And we went swimming at the beach. And I have rescue dogs. And so she helped me with my rescue dogs and all of these wonderful experiences. She had a fantastic time, movie night with Graham, all the, things that 9-year-olds like to do. And it was a big push for her because like being outside of your routine when you are young and on the spectrum is very difficult. But this particular year, she loved this visit. And her favorite part of it was the Jacob's Pillow. She just couldn't believe that adults would get up and dance and do all of this stuff in their underwear. So she spends the summer with me. She goes home and she was very excited because when she got here, she didn't have a swimming suit. So I took her swimming, but before that, I took her to get a swimsuit and I got her a 2-piece swimsuit. It was not like a bikini or anything, it covered everything. It was child appropriate, but we had to call her parents and make sure that it was okay. But like she thought it was the best thing in the world that she got to dance on the beach in her underwear, just like the dancers. So like this was a great success for me. It was a great success for her mother because her mother has 2 autistic older boys at home, also on the spectrum, and like to have like a break is kind of nice. And that was all great. So she went home and went to school. And of course, at the beginning of the school year, they have the, whatever writing prompt. And hers was, what did you do this summer? And what did you like that you did? And what did you not like that you did? And so she wrote all about how she got to watch the adults dance in their underwear. Which probably would have been okay with the description of she then got to dance for the adults in her underwear, which still might have been okay until my sister called me and said, you didn't tell me about this part of your trip, but you're going to be getting a call from Child Protective Service. Because you'll remember I said I have rescue dogs and she played with them and she loved them. And one of my dogs got really excited and jumped up and humped her one time. So, I said, Tate down, and he got down. She was very excited about it. But her writing prompt was, what did you not like about yourself? To which her reply was, I didn't like it when my aunt's dog had sex with me. Yeah. So there I am on the phone with my sister, who is now never sending her daughter to me again. But like I really had to explain, like I was a little frustrated because her school knows that she's autistic and very literal in her wording and things like that, but they still decided to call. And so I had to send pictures of her dancing on the beach in her swimming suit and pictures of us at Jacob's Pillow. And I had to explain to them that, in fact, I do not promote child animal bestiality. That my dog just got excited and humped her one time, and she just doesn't understand the wording differently. Anyways, my niece, as I said, we're still very close and she still calls me every day. She texts me every day. But we have learned from that, when we spend time together, that I then need to script her and what's happening. And I finally, as an adult, understand what it is to like need to modulate your wording a little bit and why that might be somewhat important, which until, well, you know, you kind of understand, but now I really understand. Anyways, thank you.
Okay, all right, let's give Amanda another huge. Amanda did like a little dry run of this story for me in like very, very small version in the co-op. And I was like, oh yeah, no, that's gonna be hilarious. No, like with her very dry delivery. Yeah, no, it was perfect. All right, we are down to our last two storytellers of the evening. I'm going to go last, and before that, my good friend Eric Brune is going to come up and tell us a story. Eric.
Hello. I have three children. Can you hear me? I have three children. Still. Elizabeth is my oldest, is 29. Andrew, my next, is 27. And my youngest, Rebecca, is 18 years old. And almost 18 years ago exactly, she was 5 or 6 months old. The time of life where you're aware of what's going around. You can sit up and you can reach, but you can't crawl. You can't move. And she was sitting in the middle of the floor, and there were all these colorful toys within her reach. But there was one measuring cup, you know, used for baking, that was just outside her reach. And there was another one that was precisely the same within her reach. And she was just determined to get this cup that was beyond her reach. And I was like, look at all these other colorful ones. No, 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 no. She wants this one. So what about the one that's exactly the same, that's within your reach? I mean, I wasn't saying these things, but I was like motioning it. She was still reaching for this one that was just outside of her reach. So I pushed the cup so that it's within her reach. What does she do? She pushes it back out, out of her reach. And I tell this story to a very good friend of mine, who some of you may know, Lynn Yannick, who's a psychotherapist at the time and now a psychoanalyst. And I tell her that story, and she says, so what was she like? Was it the cup, or was it the reaching, the striving that was important to her? And so I was like, oh, that's really smart. And it was just an illustration of something that probably many of us have experienced, the gap of understanding between what our children are saying or doing and the way we understand it, and similarly the way we as children misunderstand the intentions and actions of our parents. So I've had this happen to all three of my children, with all three of my children. And Elizabeth, when she was 13 or 14 years old, that was when CDs, remember CDs? You know, you would burn songs, music into these CDs. She said, Dad, I got this thing. I'll burn some songs for you. What do you want? It's like, this is my chance to show her how cool I am. And I'm like, here's a Joe Jackson song, and here's a Blondie song, and Elvis Costello, and The Clash. And I'm like, she is just going to see that I am not who she thinks I am. So I give them the names, and she comes back and she gives me the CD, and it's labeled Dad's Dorky Music. And very soon, around the same time, same with Elizabeth is sitting next to me in a car, and there's a friend of hers in the back of the car, and we're driving, I think, to West Stockbridge from Great Barrington, And we're talking, and she's being a little contentious, and she says something along the lines of, that's just a bunch of shit. I'm like, what? I don't like, you don't, we don't curse. I don't curse. I just did. But it's not something we do. And I say, what did you say? And she says, well, you know what I said. So you're grounded. You're grounded for a week. What? That's fucking unbelievable. I'm like, you're grounded for 2 weeks. And she says, that's just a bunch of bullshit. And so I say, you're grounded for 3 weeks. And so she stopped cursing at me. And for the next 3 weeks, I learned about grounding. She's the oldest, and I never grounded a child again. That when you ground your child, you ground yourself. So what I learned from that subsequently from another psychoanalyst, Ed Shapiro, remember Ed Shapiro? I was at an event and he talked about how the job of our children when they're teenagers is to establish an identity of their own. And in order to do that, they have to push away from you as parents so that they can have themselves become strong and independent adults. So I didn't know that was going on at the time, but I came to learn it. And then with Andrew, very different kind of story. So Rebecca was an unexpected addition to our household. And so Elizabeth was 11, Andrew was 9. And we're like, this, it's a joyful thing. We have a new baby, and she's been nothing but a joy. Well, she's born, and we bring her home, and she's sitting in the very same room where this measuring cup incident happened. It's about 2 weeks. She's about 2 weeks old, and Andrew is looking over her, and I'm there, and it's night, and it's a little bit dark, and he starts sort of whimpering. I'm like, Andrew, you okay? And then he starts sobbing, like really, like his shoulders were sobbing. I said, what's the matter? He said, what did I do wrong? What did I do wrong that you did have this child that was like replacing me? He didn't say that, but that's what was going on. And it was just so heartbreaking that was the way he understood it. And in all three stories, there's like today, my 18-year-old is still striving wonderfully, beautifully. My daughter, who did really good work in pushing me away, talks to me every day. And when I spoke to Andrew, my son, this morning, and I told him I was going to tell these stories, he said, I didn't remember that. And he and Rebecca, they're just like, they're the closest you could ever imagine. So that's my lost in translation. Oh, I came up with a good line. When we work through being lost in translation, we can be found in understanding. So I asked to be just before Sheela in this order because I wanted to say a little note about how lovely this evening has been for me and how Sheela and Andreas, imagine you were all equal. Imagine you're equal to all you see around. Everything has value, color, shape, and sound. And Sheila's been organizing these things, and people are discovering their voices. We're hearing these voices. There's such respect and commonality, and I just wanted to say a word for Andreas. This is beautiful, but especially for Sheela, who's been doing these for years. So no.
God damn it, Eric. You see, only party for Eric a long time to honor him. My speech, I think I was probably like 9 months pregnant, so I was super weepy. I'm weepy anyway. But I said, Eric's the only person who like can make me cry just by saying, "How are you?" All right, we are, one more round of applause for Eric Broom, please. And I would just like to just echo his sentiments. I really like, especially with our COVID, I don't know, are we out of COVID? Trying to sort of regain connections. And I just find that I'm so grateful for this storytelling opportunity, like physical coming together, but then the stories too. Like it's just, the best stories are vulnerable. They make you, you're expressing your vulnerability, and it's vulnerability that we all have in common. So it's just a really, really beautiful thing. And yeah, I hope to see you all here again. And thank you all for coming.
Cheers.
Yeah. Here's my story. It's not sad. Okay. So when I was a freshman in college, I fell in love with Italian. I love the sound of the words. I love the sounds of the foods. I love the taste of the foods. I love the sounds of the words, the food words made. I loved everything about it. I knew that Italy would be in my future. In the class, I totally kicked ass. It was my best class. I was the best one in the class. I had 8+ all the way through. And sure enough, my junior year, I studied abroad in Milan. Now, the only problem was that my outside of the classroom communication was not as strong as my inside the classroom communication. So I was one of those women who was always apologizing for stuff I hadn't done. I hemmed and hawed. I did not let my no be no and my yes be yes. As somebody said, in fact, I had once used my no very clearly and I had been laughed at for using my no. So that was the Sheela who landed in Milan in the winter of 1993 by myself for the first time. And the first time I had to actually use this language I'd been studying for 2 years was in the taxi on the way from the train station to my apartment. And I'd been practicing it for all the 8 hours on the flight. So I had it on my paper and I got into the taxi and I was like shaking and I was like, okay. Trenta, Viale, Tunisia, per favore. And the taxi driver said, va bene, okay. And as the car pulled away, I remember thinking, oh my God, this shit works. That's a miracle. You say it and it produces an effect. So I produced all sorts of effects for the next few weeks. I would order pizza and I thought I was doing great. I'd point to the pizza on the menu, pizza comes. I would say un cappuccino, a cappuccino would arrive. In the classroom, again, I was fine. It was just like being in Boston, though. It was all Americans and we're all just speaking Italian in our little enclave. And then we walk out the room and it's all English all the time. And we go to the bar and it's all English all the time. I did not have any opportunity to actually use Italian in a real world Italian context, really, for real, and actually challenge my language until one night. So the student in our group, there's about 30 of us who spoke by far the best Italian, the most fluent Italian, had taken some advice to heart. Some of you may have heard, as I heard a lot when I went to Italy, is that if you really want to learn the language, what you got to do is get yourself an Italian boyfriend or girlfriend, right? So Marianne had taken this advice a few steps further than most people in our group had thought to do. And by the time a month had rolled by, she'd already gone through 3 Italian guys. So one night she's banging on my door. I'm already in my PJs. It's like 8 o'clock and she bangs on my door and her eyes are like begging eyes. And she's like, Sheila, Marco's going to be here in half an hour and he's bringing a friend. Could you please just go out on a blind date with the friend? And I'm just like, no. But I don't say no. I say yes when I mean no. So I said yes. So I change on my pajamas and I have to put on my going out outfit. And I open the door to my blind date. Now, listeners, there is a pejorative term for a certain kind of Italian man, which we used to use. I'm sure it's no longer in fashion. We're not allowed to say it anymore, but I'm going to use it because it was his actual name as well. His name was Guido. His name was Guido, and Guido wore a very long leather jacket belted He had he had chains, 3. He had very, very long, stringy, greasy hair that actually dripped oil. He had very few teeth, but the teeth he did have were brown. From what I soon learned was a chain smoking habit. So I did want to say no, but again, I did not feel like I had the option to say no. So I said yes, and we went out. Guido and I in the front of the car, and Marianne and Marco in the back of the car. And we headed to a bar nearby, and it was perfectly fine. It was a lot of noise, a lot of music, so I really didn't have to talk much. And asked me where I was from, and I gave the very easy answer, which I'd already given a few times, which is Boston. And I was like, okay, I got my drink. I'm thinking after an hour, I'm gonna be, my job is over, I can go home. But, in Italy, Marco lived with his family, and Marianne lived with a roommate. So they wanted to get down to business. They needed to do it somewhere else. So that's what they were interested in doing that evening. So we had to find a place to go, and they decided to go to Guido's hair salon. He owned a hair salon. That's the hair. That's the hair. So he drives us like through the wilds of Milan, like to like the outskirts of Milan. We're like right to like this darkened street. We pull up to this like hair salon, Guido's hair salon, and he opens the door. Lets us in and light on. Marianne and Marco, like we could just be, chop liver. They just head to the back. They draw a curtain. They just get down to business. And meanwhile, Guido and I are in the front of this hair salon. And he invites me to sit down on a love seat for 2. And I'm sitting there. And I do not remember what we talked about. I just remember like noticing all the physical details. And at first we were just sitting apart. And he moved a little closer. And then he put his arm around the back, but he wasn't actually touching me. And then the next time I knew, he was like touching my shoulder. And when you act in a way and you don't know where it's coming from, like it's a force outside of your being, like this is not you, it's like it's really an outside force that's acting. So in that moment, this was just not me. I don't know where this came from, but I sprang up from my seat and I spun around, and in perfectly fluent Italian, I said, "Mi fai paura e voglio andare a casa adesso." And that means, you scare me and I want to go home right now. And, he could have done any number of things. He could have laughed. I mean, he could have just overtaken me, overpowered me. He could have laughed as I was used to. He could have, just continued on, pretended I hadn't spoken at all. But in fact, he said, "Va bene, okay." And he brought me home, left me off. I never saw him again in my life. So I think of this incident because it's a little weird. It's a little mysterious that in my own language, my own native tongue, I could not make myself understood. I could not speak the truth. And it took this total lack of comfort in this foreign language for me to find my actual voice. Yeah.